Hi there, welcome to another lesson in circle graphs. In today's lesson, we're going to be taking a look at circle graphs that show us degrees of a circle. Here in this example, we can see that students were probably surveyed as to which instrument they played first. Just by looking at this graph, we can see that the biggest section represents students that first played piano. And we can see that this is 150 degrees. Well, in order to figure out what percent of the circle that is, we would have to know what degrees are in a total circle. Do you know that? Absolutely, you're right, 360 degrees. Let's take a look at some examples using degrees in a circle. In this particular example, we can see what was being sold at a pet store. We're first being asked what percent of the pet store's sales was on fish supplies. Well, let's take a look. Fish. Looks like that's purple, and that is 36 degrees. Well, that doesn't tell us a whole lot. 36 degrees doesn't make sense. Now remember, we know how to figure out percent. Percent is part out of total. And if we start with a fraction, part over total, we can easily divide and change that to a percentage. Do we know the part that was spent, do we know the part of the sales that was fish supplies? Yes, 36 degrees. Do we know the total? Yes, the total in a circle is 360 degrees. So here would be our part out of total. Now let's divide and change this into a percentage. If I divide on my calculator 36 divided by 360, I get 0.1. Now of course that's a decimal, we'll have to change it to a percent. So we're going to move it, add a percent sign, and this becomes a 0, and that looks like 10%. 10% of the sales at a pet store was on fish supplies. Now let's try the next question. Here it asks us what percent of the sales was dog supplies. Well, let's go take a look. Dogs, that's the orange. It looks like that's 81.6 degrees. So again, we're going to start with part over total. We know that the part for sales of dog supplies is 81.6 degrees. We know the total of all the sales would be the total degrees in an entire circle, which is 360 degrees. So again, if we divide with the calculator, this time taking 81.6 divided by 360, the calculator tells us 0.22 and then the 6 repeats. So again, let's move it. Looks like I have 22.6 repeating. Well, if I just round this to the tenths place, because of the number 6 after this digit, it's going to jump this up to a 7. So it looks like we have about 22.7% of the sales at the pet store being dog supplies. Just from the graph, you can tell that this section for dogs is larger than the section for sale of fish supplies, which makes sense when we figured out the percentages. The percentage of dog supplies sold was also bigger than the percentage of fish. All right, let's take a look at another one. Here in this example, we can see the different vegetables that have been planted in a garden. This circle graph tells us percentage. We know that all of these percents should add up to 100%. We are being asked, what would the angle measure be for the amount of potatoes in the garden? Well, let's find potatoes. Potatoes is in blue, and it looks like the blue part of potatoes is 10%. It's hard to see, but I think that it goes right with this lighter blue. So we want to figure out, well, what is 10% of all of the vegetables? Well, we can see that 10% is a part of this circle graph. Well, what part is it in degrees? So think 10% What is 10% of the entire circle? Well, we know we can change 10% to a decimal. Back it up, 0.1 or 0.10. We know that of means multiply, but then we need to think about an entire circle. How many degrees does an entire circle have? Well, 360. So what is 10% of 360 degrees? What is 10% of an entire circle? Well, let's use the calculator. If we type in 0.10 times 360 degrees, we're going to get 36 degrees. So this 10% right here would actually represent an angle that's 36 degrees. Let's try another one. Okay, in this next example, we can see that this tells us the amount of people that are living in New York City homeless shelters. Here, we're being asked, what would the angle measure be for the amount of single adults that are living in the homeless shelters? So here we can look at single adults, that's representing this red section, and we can see that this is the number of single adults that are in the shelters. Well, we want to know what angle measure that represents. Well, take a look here. We know that the entire circle is 360 degrees. And if you look at this angle, it almost looks like it's close to a right angle. Not quite, but close. A right angle would look something similar to this. It's just a little bit less than that. And we know that a right angle is 90 degrees. So it would make sense that this section would be a little bit less than 90 degrees. Let's figure out what it would be. Well, let's see, what do we know? We know that there are 15,015 single adults in the homeless shelters. We also know that the total people is 62,692. So from this information, we can put part over total. So this is the number of single adults. This is the total in the shelters. Now from this part and this total, we can figure out what percent. So if I divide with a calculator, what percent of the people were single adults? My calculator says 0.2395, and then it keeps going. Let's change this into a percent. Move it. I have about 23.95, which really, the 5 is going to bump the 9 up, which will bump this up to about approximately 24%. Now, doesn't it make sense that if we're talking about a quarter here of an entire circle, that this part would be 25% of the entire circle? So we're really close here with this 24%, because remember, that's smaller. Well, what is 24% of an entire circle? An entire circle is 360 degrees. What is 24% of 360 degrees? Remember, before we said it should be really close to 90 degrees. Not quite, just under. So we're going to go back it up, 0.24 of means times, and multiply by 360 degrees. When you do that, your calculator should say 86.4, and that would be degrees. 86.4 degrees. So this angle, the angle here for the red section would be 86.4 degrees, which is just a little bit less than 90 degrees, which is what we thought. So here again, we figured out the percentage, and we took percent of 360 degrees. Okay, in this last example, we can see the calories that a person consumes in each of the food groups. Here we're being asked, what would the angle measure be for the amount of calories consumed from fats? So here we can see that this number represents the fats. So similar to the last one, we can see that it looks like this is almost 90 degrees, a little bit less than that, but almost 90 degrees. So we're going to get a number that's a little bit less than 90 degrees again. Well, let's think about what we did before. We need to have a percentage. We need to be able to figure out a percent of 360 degrees. So to get a percent, I would need a part out of a total. Do we know the part? Yes, we know that 589 calories came from fats in the diet. But what's the total? Here we're going to have to figure out the total because it doesn't tell us like in the last one. So we would have to add up all of these numbers to get the total. If you added up all of the numbers in each of the sections here to get the total calories, you're going to get 2,543 calories. So here's my part out of total. Once I have that, I can figure out the percent. If you divide in the calculator, you get 0.2316, and the decimal keeps going on. So if I go move it, I would have 23 point, let's go to the tenths. You see the digit 1? Look right after it. Is it going to stay a 1 or is it going to bump up to a 2? Well, the 6 makes this bump up to a 2. So we have about 23.2%. And again, this looks like it's really close to 25% of the entire circle because it's about a quarter of the circle. Now let's figure out, once we have the percent, what is 23.2% of an entire 360-degree circle? Well, if you use a calculator, back it up, 0.232 times 360 degrees in the calculator to figure this out, it's going to tell us 83.52, and that would be degrees. 23.2% of an entire 360-degree circle is about 83.52 degrees. So that means that this section right here, which looks almost like a right angle, but not quite, it's not quite 90 degrees, is about 83.52 degrees. So again, you notice how we first had to find the percent. Sometimes the percent will be given to you. If you know the percent, that's easy. Just multiply it by 360 degrees to change it to degrees of a circle. All right, have a great day, everybody. Thank you for joining me.